In a time of ongoing hostility from the Trump administration to refugees seeking asylum,
CBS News has learned exclusively the Trump administration is putting together a plan that would allow immigration officials to swiftly reject some asylum applications without interviewing applicants.
there is one group that the White House has remained enthusiastic about bringing in.
Trump has falsely claimed they face racial persecution and genocide.
In May 2026, every single person admitted to the United States of America as a refugee was a white South African.
The claims of a white genocide and racial violence have been rejected by the UN Human Rights Office, among others.
As Mother Jones has reported, with more than 6,000 refugees admitted to this country since October 1 of last year,
but whether they're white or black makes no difference to me.
only 3 asylum seekers who were admitted was anything but somebody white from South Africa.
The Trump administration is advancing plans to increase the number of white South Africans it admits to the United States as refugees in the coming months. The proposal would see an additional 10,000 white South Africans resettled into the U.S., even as the Trump administration continues to block the entry of refugees from other countries.
This explicit policy is shockingly cruel to those from other countries who are in need of actual asylum.
Levahang Petko is a senior research fellow and political economist at the Trade Collective think tank and a professor of practice at the University of Johannesburg.
And it's a stupid stunt that is costing U.S. taxpayers at least $100 million for no good reason.
We saw another South African, Elon Musk, do at one of those rallies where he had that stiff arm salute. So you have Peter Thiel, you have David Sachs, and you have Elon Musk. These are the people that are very close to Trump and J.D. Vance.
But it's emblematic of a larger response in the country among moderates as well as the right-wing extremists now holding office.
It's really important because what they also represent is tech capital. They represent libertarianism. They represent a really rabid form of white nationalism. They also represent a form of rabid surveillance capital, surveillance politics, which is shrouded in this idea of statelessness.
Today, I want to talk about the dangers of race nostalgia creeping into areas where you don't even notice that it's happening.
They also link this with defense technology and really a putrid kind of anti-liberal libertarian politics, which purport again to be beyond politics. And yet all of them have said things around so-called anti-wokeness, a very, very problematic terminology.
I'll address cultural change and how white solidarity as an argument has infected nearly every kind of political discussion being made today.
And I think the irony that isn't lost on many of us is that this comes at a time when there is an actual genocide being purported upon people across the Gaza Strip, Palestine, Iran, and so forth.
Even if many of them are far more subtle than Republicans bringing more white South Africans to the U.S.
They want to complain, and I mean the media and the left, about 49 farmers because they're white. Why else are they complaining, Laura?
There's no other reason that they're complaining. If they were not white, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
In prior episodes, I've talked about the hatred for women that undergirds so much of what is going on in the Trump administration.
Never smiles. She never smiles. She's a young, beautiful woman, never smiles.
And this hatred that I'm talking about today,
I never see a smile off her face. I see her standing there with hatred in her eyes.
which manifests more or less as white supremacy,
You're not allowed to complain about Somalians because that's racist.
seems to be just as deep-seated as the misogyny.
And the worst thing you can be in Minnesota is a racist.
It's a profound psychological issue teased out and pumped up by the malicious actors.
On the heels of President Trump using disparaging imagery to describe African nations, new tapes have just been released by the National Archives that reveal similar language used by the late President Ronald Reagan,
who are running the country right now to gain power.
So let me take you back to 1971, and it was Reagan, who was, by the way, the governor of California at the time, was on the phone with then President Richard Nixon.
For those who, by natural temperament or by the circumstances of how they were raised.
And so during this conversation, Reagan referred to leaders of African nations as, quote, monkeys, and then President Nixon gets in his own dig.
Need a particular kind of love and approval from a strongman daddy figure.
That's right. Dad comes home. and he's pissed.
We see how the politics of resentment can be effective.
And when Dad gets home, you know what he says? You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now.
Some people need to be loved more than others.
I'm not going to lie. This is going to hurt you a lot more than it hurts me. And you earned this.
Meaning that they want to receive more love than other people around them.
That's not said in the spirit of hate. It's not said in the spirit of vengeance or bigotry.
And not only that, but some of these people need to see that love proved by getting to witness punishment of others who are less worthy and less loved.
They weaken the men to drive the women insane to have the most consistent voting bloc ever in the history of politics. Unhappy women made unhappy by weak men.
People who want this kind of sick love want a love that is judgmental and exclusionary.
My guest today is George Lakoff, one of America's preeminent linguists, political thinkers, and contributors to how we actually think about politics.
They feel that if they submit to the demands of that father figure,
politics is about morality. It's about right and wrong. And on the conservative side, these things come out of what I call strict father morality.
They will create a world in which somehow time will stop, no change will happen, and everything can be depended on.
The strict father family is what James Dobson has been pushing for some times at the focus on the family. And it says that you need a strict father to protect the family. Mommy can't do it.
They can remain permanent, beloved children of that angry father who will protect them and take out his anger on other lesser competitors for his favor.
But George, isn't Trump also appealing to racism, xenophobia, fear, anger of the other? Doesn't this go beyond the strict father notion?
You have to know what the strict father says. The strict father morality, when you map it onto politics, gives you a moral hierarchy. It says this is the right way to think.
Bad actors in organized churches or disorganized cults often take advantage of this kind of human vulnerability in a religious context.
The hierarchy is simple. You have God over man, religion has won out. You have man over nature, drill, baby, drill. You have the rich over the poor, they deserve it. You have employers over employees, adults over children. Children can be beaten with sticks in 21 states if they don't just listen to their teachers and their coaches.
Racism is a way to inject those kinds of fears into politics.
You have Western culture over non-Western culture, America over other countries, men over women, whites over non-whites, Christians over non-Christians, straights over gays. That is the moral hierarchy that's there, and every bit of Republican legislation, conservative Republican legislation, fits that moral hierarchy.
The U.S. right now is suffering from it being open season for both religious and political manipulation of who is worthy and who will be saved.
This kind of strict father morality has been enunciated by the Republican Party, certainly in the modern era. Why has it become so dominant now? Is there something going on in the world or in the United States that makes this particularly appealing now?
In this sick world of anxiety and placation, a politician who loves every constituent is not a public servant, but an abomination.
Well, Democrats never understood what it was. They didn't understand conservatives, and they don't now. Basically, since Goldwater lost, and he got 37% of the vote, basically 37% plus or minus 2 has been consistent from 1964 to the present. That's the strict father populism that's out there. That's the Trump base.
Everything he gives others means he is depriving his legitimate flock of their just rewards.
All he has to do is get a small number of additional folks who have some conservative views or other, and he's got a majority.
In their thinking.
My guest, Ian Haney Lopez. He's broken the code on the racist politics of the last 50 years as politicians mastered the use of dog whistles to turn Americans against each other while turning America over to plutocrats.
How better to illustrate this model than Trump showing his supporters he will only let people in the country who look like them.
We need to understand that race has been one of the ways in which we've explained why certain groups get certain privileges and advantages and why other groups don't get privileges or are exploited or excluded from the country.
Who feel persecuted in the ways that they do.
this operates not just in terms of class relations and group relations. This operates in terms of a common sense understanding of who's trustworthy, who's decent, who's law-abiding, and in contrast, who's loathsome, who's diseased, who's dangerous.
Whose lives are portrayed as made worse or threatened by political change and the recognition of humanity and citizenship of other human beings.
And in that sense, I want to start using the term strategic racism. It's racism as a strategy. It's cold, it's calculating, it's considered. It's the decision to achieve one's own ends, here winning votes, by stirring racial animosity.
You don't have to look at the sympathy that Hitler had for white Afrikaners to see the historical parallels.
Nicholas Christoph joins Hari Srinivasan to speak about the harrowing picture he saw in Kenya and Sudan after the USAID supply lines were cut.
And it's easy enough to understand how the willingness to murder hundreds of thousands of human beings.
I don't know if you've, seen children starving to death, but it's just something that just is shattering these. Typically, it's young kids in the first 5 years of life, often just after they've been weaned, and they are expressionless. They don't cry because the body is saving every calorie, every bit of energy to keep the major organs functioning.
Since the beginning of the second Trump administration, due to cuts to the U.S. Agency for International Development, reinforces that same model.
I went to an area that traditionally had a mobile clinic going there to bring emergency food rations to keep children who were severely malnourished alive. And a week before, that had been cut off because of the aid shutdown. And now, immediately upon reaching the village, I found a bunch of children who were severely, acutely malnourished.
Death on a massive scale is just the exclusionary side implicit in the inclusion of white South Africans as refugees in the U.S.
So a lot of this is taking money that is keeping children alive for 12 cents a day and using that to fund tax cuts for some of the wealthiest Americans.
There's a quote I was looking for recently in something Andrew Sullivan wrote several years ago. I couldn't find the specific passage I'd been thinking of, but for better or for worse, Sullivan tends to stick to the same ideas over and over again.
I understand people, the backs go up when you mention immigration, and people get very, they understandably, they get a bit anxious about talking about it.
He's a gay immigrant who is distrustful of other queer folks and immigrants, but insistently portrays himself as a thoughtful moderate. So it wasn't hard to find a statement similar to the one I was remembering, but made a year or so after it. In June 2018, Sullivan posted on Twitter, "Slowing massive demographic change is not fascist, it's conservative." He was arguing against undocumented people in America, but did this sleight of hand to talk about slowing demographic change. Is he against people coming without papers, or is he against people from predominantly non-white countries showing up? I've thought about this line of reasoning a lot since he made that comment years ago, because slowing massive demographic change is eugenics. What is massive demographic change? When has the U.S. not faced massive demographic change? What if that change is already baked in through those present in the country today? Why should demographic change matter in a country explicitly built on ideals and not on bloodlines?
Sharif Ali joins us, president of the International Refugee Assistance Project, which is currently litigating a class action lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's dismantling of the United States refugee program.
The white Afrikaner program would be a joke, except for the fact that it's wasting taxpayer dollars while simultaneously removing a long-standing role that the U.S. has played in accepting asylum seekers from places like Haiti and Venezuela.
What's happening is not only that they're allowing just this one population coming into the U.S., but it's happening to impact the lives of thousands of other people who've went through years of vetting, who have went through years of persecution and violence in trying to find safety.
Even potential refugees from countries long acknowledged to be dangerous or unstable right now are more likely to remain trapped where they're at these days.
For instance, there's been 12,000 people prior to this executive order that were conditionally approved for travel. Those are people that had sold all of their belongings. They are people who left their home.
The longstanding ideal of the country as a home for poor, huddled masses yearning to breathe free is erased.
There are people now that don't know where they're going, and in fact, many of them are not even able to work in the countries of first asylum in which they reside in currently. There's also over 100,000 people that were going forward with the process of resettling in the United States. Now they are stuck and they're in limbo.
Most people who aren't already MAGA understand that bringing in Afrikaners, who in many cases believe they've been targeted for white genocide, is a perversion and mockery of U.S. refugee policy.
We need to situate this within a few things. One is the rehabilitation of white victimhood. This is also to do with the delegitimization of African sovereignty and black majority rule.
But I remember thinking during the first Trump administration that Sullivan's arguments have a lot more currency, that a lot of people who don't necessarily see themselves as overtly calling for authoritarian government would be sympathetic to his statements.
Is there anything that you think Trump has done right?
Yeah, I mean, I think cracking down on fentanyl, making sure our borders are stronger.
It both is and isn't a thing. People may dream of a time when their lives were different, but when they feel that kind of threat from outsiders, it's more often a loss of their own cultural currency and importance.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Whether through age or changing social norms or cultural trends.
Am I so out of touch?
That corner store was not necessarily going to make it on its own long before a newcomer took its place.
No, it's the children who are wrong.
The trap is the idea that someone else's race or culture is the actual reason you feel lost.
I may not make an honest buck, but I'm 100% American. And I don't work for no two-bit Nazi. Let it go.
As political scientist Justin Guest noted a few years ago, between 1845 and 1854, not even a full decade, the volume of arriving Irish immigrants on the East Coast outnumbered immigrants from all other countries since 1776 combined. After the Civil War, millions of black men got the vote in another major shift. But note again that the fears triggered by that, the fears that led to the undoing of Reconstruction and the imposition of Jim Crow laws, those were not about demographic change because it was people who were already present in the country, but it was about power and who was relegated to suffering a second-class existence. Guest explained that by the time the United States would have faced its first transformation into a majority-minority country, whiteness had already embraced Irish, Italians, Jews, and Slavs, at least to the degree that, despite ongoing prejudice against those groups, the milestone was effectively postponed.
Two things matter enormously.
Squawking about demographics today is just as foolish and dangerous.
The numbers and how different the cultures are.
Andrew Sullivan is now, like me, an old person. I'm in my late 50s. He's in his early 60s. It is human to be sad if the central culture that enriched and animated your life is passing from relevance to most people in a given country. It is also an entirely natural phenomenon. Realizing that most people in your country don't share your ideas about food or music or television can be alienating and lead to some reactionary behavior. It's like the guy in the comic who pretends he can't get his plain black coffee just because a lot of people now want other things. And when your beloved corner store closes, it can be easy to blame it on malevolence or the background of someone different who takes over the lease. But that presupposes that your store would have stayed open, we all grow old and become less relevant. But white boomers and Gen Xers, of which I am one, have taken their personal griefs and tried to make the United States government reshape society so that they will not be left uncomfortable.
You know, this was something America addressed in the 1920s. They had these debates. They had these conversations openly.
You have a right to be sad over change, but as soon as you're arguing that you have a right to say what color the skin of the person living next door to you should be, you're expecting the government to do eugenics because of your feelings.
And they chose in the 1920s to say we are going to put strict quotas on people coming from different parts of the world. 65 did away with what we did in the 20s. So do we need something like the 1924 Act?
The white Afrikaner refugee policy is a broad theatrical way of Trump saying, yes, you should not be inconvenienced. If you continue to support me, I will go to outrageous lengths to protect you and people I decide are like you.
The 1924 Act is such a good example because, so we had large-scale immigration from Europe from 1880 to 1920. So in other words, we went from a country that had immigration from part of Europe to immigration from many other parts of Europe. But even other European countries pose enormous stresses on the U.S. system, both economically and in terms of security.
But if you subscribe to the idea that the U.S. is a country of ideas,
I don't think it works particularly well in the United States at large.
As I do, it raises another question.
It's a beautiful and wonderful founding vision, but it's not enough by itself.
Given that there has been no true indigenous population in the U.S. in charge of the federal government since its creation, at what point in U.S. history did demographic change become unjust and merit correction?
If you think about it, identifying America just with agreeing with the principles, let's say, of the Declaration of Independence, that's a definition that is way over-inclusive and under-inclusive at the same time.
What about the parts of the country which have long been majority-minority?
Well, first of all, it would include hundreds of millions, maybe billions of foreign citizens who agree with the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Must we admit all of them tomorrow?
By explicitly showing that you will protect white people only and punishing everyone else, what political promised future does that create?
But at the same time, that answer would also reject a lot of people that the ADL would label as domestic extremists, even though those very Americans had their ancestors fight in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War.
It promises an end to democracy.
American citizenship must mean belonging to a nation that guards the sovereignty of its people, especially from a modern world that's hell-bent on dissolving borders and differences in national character.
This explicit Trump view has led to a strange phenomenon in which many people who claim to be strongly opposed to the current administration find themselves adopting some of its tactics.
Joining me now to discuss his life and career and future potential political career is Rahm Emanuel.
Democrats who might refer to themselves as centrists cater to nasty immigration policies.
If Democrats were smart, said, we're good with you on illegal as it relates to the border. Now let's talk about legal, because that's where the wedge is in the Republican Party.
They haven't, though. You know, they haven't.
Well, I'm aware of that.
Yeah. That's what makes you a little different.
Democratic consultants and even key politicians long for a macho white guy to help save the party and the country from right-wing extremists.
Michigan Democratic Senator Alyssa Slotkin has been laying out her strategy, and she joins me now.
These figures have been taken up by those with ties to national politics, cultivated and encouraged to run.
So as part of this roadmap to, as you say, contain and defeat Donald Trump, you say the Democratic Party should shed its public perception as weak and woke.
This sends a message on a fundamental level that manly white men taking charge is the only way out of this mess.
Just bringing a little alpha energy back into the party, right? And I'm from the Midwest, and for us, leaders like our coaches are just, they've got some alpha energy to them, and I think we've lost some of that in the party, and I want to see that come back.
The argument goes that if we cater to the strongman-loving model just enough to recapture the votes of those who abandoned the Democratic Party at one point or another, we can run a bait and switch by imposing progressive policies, even if the voters who get fooled weren't necessarily asking for that.
When politically motivated, serious and false accusations are made against me, Maine, you have my back.
Today I'm talking less about those candidates' actual platforms or backgrounds and more about why they get selected to run or receive massive support from institutions and institutional figures.
Nicole Hannah-Jones joins me now. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter with the New York Times Magazine. She's the creator of the 1619 Project.
If white solidarity becomes the overriding principle in selecting candidates, it affects the entire political system over time.
The hallmark of a liberal democracy is protection of minority rights and that people have a right and ability to choose their own representation.
The downstream effects of that will be even greater segregation of people of color from public life and greater targeting of minorities. More of the kind of purging that will likely follow the Supreme Court's recent further gutting of the Voting Rights Act.
We've done a grave disservice to both the truth and the enduring fight for equality when we frame the civil rights movement and the fight for voting rights as merely a black rights movement.
The priority should be for the Democratic Party or individual candidates to develop a vision that draws voters rather than handpick candidates who actively or passively confirm the larger pool of voter blindness or bigotry.
It's true. Black people were the ones who were willing to sacrifice their lives, their homes, their bodies in order to democratize America. But this really was about ensuring democracy for everyone.
This episode today is a little more of a thinky thing and a little bit less of a here's how you can take action episode. That's meant to make you think about how refugee and immigrant issues get framed.
And what does it mean to be a Democrat? A number of things.
But if we are going to acknowledge the psychological need many have to belong to an exclusionary club.
First, it means that as a Democrat, you promote the freedom and well-being of all. Number one.
It's important to be actively dismantling that club.
Two, you believe, as Lincoln said, that in a democracy, you have a government of, by, and for the people.
And to end its ability to punish out groups and communities portrayed as undesirable.
But also, for the people means you have to take care of the people. You're doing what you would call the common good.
And there are lots of ways that you can do that, nationally and close to home.
Now, let's say it plainly. There has never been a president as corrupt as Donald Trump. There is no close second in our history.
One way is through ending the staggering levels of corruption being unleashed right now.
Now, that is a quote from Rolling Stone magazine, but a growing number of Americans seem to be agreeing.
Demand your national representatives stand up for expanded accountability and investigations of corruption. If the House of Representatives swings back into Democratic control this fall, this will be a key role for the new majority to play. But they can get started right now, today, as we've recently seen with calls for subpoenas on prediction markets and apparent instances of insider trading. On a local level, look at the parameters for how municipal contracts get awarded. Put in greater ethics rules and see who law enforcement is accountable to. The less strongman style politicians can personally control in terms of who gets rewarded and who gets punished, the less corrupt they can make the system as they try to move it to a bribes and influence model.
The American Bar Association, which is perhaps America's top sort of attorney membership association, said that more than any other president in recent history, Trump caters to the wealthiest and most powerful, the billionaires, the CEOs of major corporations, and the extremely well-heeled and well-connected. So as long as they are willing to pay for the privilege.
Run for local office, join a library board or other community organization. The more services where you live that are made available broadly to everyone, and the more people who are involved in government and using those services, the more fireproof your community becomes against resentments and corruption on a local level than we are as a country right now on the federal level. The more people who rise up organically through local political involvement, the less susceptible state elections will be to outside influence and the theories of those who think that only one kind of person can run for office and win. But also, The more we build our communities to offer services to everyone and meet everyone's needs, the harder it will be for malicious actors to gain a toehold by promising that America's real salvation comes only through protecting white South African refugees and Trump voters.
Thanks for listening to Next Comes What. Please share this with one person who's looking for ways to survive this mess. To support this podcast, please become a paid subscriber at AndreaPitzer.com and consider giving Next Comes What a 5-star review where you get your podcasts.
And that's it.